Um, as I mentioned on Instagram a couple of times, I made a slope top, which is a fantastic pattern put out by Shibui in their beautiful twig yarn. I made one when I was on vacation a couple of weeks ago, and it was a really easy knit, and I just breezed through it in about a week. It's totally mindless and really easy to knit while you are reading. But I had almost a skein and a half left over of the charcoal color that I used, so I decided to make a modified version and using stripes. I tried at first to do something with Intarsia, maybe have like a big triangle across the front. Intarsia didn't take so well with this yarn because it's such it's a linen and silk and wool blend, so it didn't fill out as much as I needed it to for the Intarsia. But that's fine because I actually really, really like stripes. One thing that's annoying about stripes, of course, is weaving in all the ends. Back when I lived in Canada, my lovely, lovely friend Marika would actually weave in the ends for me because she is fantastic like that. Once in a while we would just kind of go through my unfinished projects pile and she'd weave in all the ends and help me like Kitchener stitch the toe of my socks. So I miss her for many reasons. This is one of them. In the meantime, I've had to learn how to weave in my own ends or to avoid doing that at all. So what I found is, I found a couple of written tutorials on how to do this, but I don't think there's any really good video ones. I'll give you a close-up of this in a second, but basically this is a way to weave in the ends as you go. And I've left the tails here because I always cut the tails right at the end after it's blocked to give the yarn room to stretch and to grow with the finished object before I cut the tails off. If you cut the tails off too early and then you block your object, you risk the little ends just popping out at the front or at the back. So I'll show you in a second how it's done, but basically you're wrapping the yarn around itself. So you're wrapping your two ends around your working yarn as you go, and that traps it in there. So you don't have to go back after with a tapestry needle and weave up and down. It's really, really great for stripes. It's not so great for using with the same color. For some reason I found that it works well if they're stacked on top of each other, but not necessarily if it's in the middle of a row. It also gives a little bit of a gap, but that is totally fixable, so I'll show you how to do that as well. Okay, so here I've finished a sequence of the light gray stripes. So I have 8 rows of stocking stitch, and I'm 1 stitch before I need to change colors to switch to the charcoal gray. So I'll go ahead and knit that 1 stitch. Now I'm going to cut a tail of this first yarn, the light gray yarn. I'm leaving, what is this, about 6 inches, maybe a bit more than that. A good, yeah, about 15 centimeters. And what I'll do is start, I'll pick up my other end, so the charcoal yarn, and just kind of make sure that they're about the same length, and that will make sense in a second. So slip my marker. I am using rubber bands, just little, I think they're meant for bracelets. Like there was a trend about a year or so ago where kids were making bracelets with these little rubber bands, and you could find them everywhere. And now I'm finding them at the craft store for 99 cents for a pack of 1,000. So really handy if, like me, you always lose your stitch markers all over the place. So I just knit the first stitch with the new color. So I'm tensioning it between, I held it between 2 fingers for that first stitch, but just do whatever you're comfortable with. So now I've got the working yarn that's attached to my tiny little ball of dark gray yarn. I'll go into the next stitch, and then I will take the 2 ends, so the silver end and the charcoal end, and pass it over the working yarn. So I just kind of flip it and then hold them out of the way in my left hand. So knit that stitch. And then I keep doing that. I usually do that for about 15 stitches. Depending on the gauge, I want to get a good couple of inches. So go into the stitch, and then in the back, get those 2 tails together, flip them over the yarn, the working yarn,
go back to the front, wrap your working yarn around, pull it through. One more time, go into the stitch, and then find those two ends, flip them over, and knit. So I do that, it's a little bit easier once you are used to finding them with your fingers. You don't have to flip it over to look at it each time. Don't worry too much about the tension at this point. It feels a little bit weird to find the ends and then not to pull too tight, but as I like to say, it will block out in the end. So I'm just going to do a couple more stitches of this. Now, one thing that happens, and this is really common, one thing that happens whenever you change colors or even when you change skeins without doing some kind of a joint, like a Russian joint or a braided joint, is that you get some uneven tension at the start. You can see it down here in my previous row, so that's a little bit uneven. You can see it even over here. What you do for that is that don't worry about it for the first row. Once you've knit a couple of rows on top of it, so I do it, I go through it once at the end, but if it annoys you to see that kind of uneven tension, what you do is flip around to the back. So as you can see on the working side here, or on the back, but on my working row, the two ends are trapped around the yarn. They're trapped by the yarn that I'm using for my live stitches. So down here, you've got, these are the two ends that I wove in, and you have the silver color wrapped around them on both sides. I think you can see that. I hope you can see that. So what you do to tidy it up is to hold the work in your hand and then just give it a good tug. And same thing with the other one. It doesn't really work if you try to pull both at once, because they're wrapped around each other. So you just kind of one at a time, tug on them a little bit, and you might over tension. So then we'll go fix that. So this one here too. It's kind of satisfying actually, just to see how much slack there is within that. So pull on it here and pull on it there. So if we go back to the front, now you'll see it's a little bit over tension, but it looks a lot more even than it did before. And, oh wait, here we go. It looks a lot more even, and you can pull on it, even it out. With something like a linen or a silk, which I'm using for this, I'm not too worried. I know that it will block much more evenly. With the wool, you would get much more even results right away. So you wouldn't even need to tension it that much, especially if you're using a really sticky wool, something that will almost felt together a little bit or will stick really well. It's not going to ravel down, and it's not going to show those holes. So that's how I work stripes while weaving the ends in on their own without having to go back at the end.